Okay, here we are. We're in Montana. I'm hoping that this recorder picks up the sounds. It's really the thing that stands out most. The place is just teeming with life, animal life. Like the ratio of non-human creatures to human creatures is like, I'm the minority here. And look at that, see? I just walked like two steps and a little bunny ran right across, right in front of me, a little bunny. There's like all kinds of chipmunks and these crazy birds that make these wild sounds. And there's apparently big animals too, bears. I mean like a mountain lion, but I haven't seen any of them, hoping not to run into them. It's so wild. Hope we can hear it.
Hey, what's up? That's right. I'm coming to you from Montana from the Feathered Pipe Ranch. This is Yoga Talks Podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If you're new to the podcast, this won't mean anything to you. But if you've been listening, you know I've been talking about it for weeks and weeks. And I'm coming to Montana. And here I am. And I thought that I might record the intro while I was walking in the forest. And that's what you were listening to. But as I was doing it, I started to feel a little bit like a dumbass. I don't know, with me and my microphone in the forest when there was so much incredible nature going on around me. Maybe you could have heard it some in that recording. I don't know if you can really hear how amazing it is. This property here, I don't even know how much they have, but I walked up to the edge of the property line and it's surrounded by national forests for like as far as your eye could see. So I could have just walked out, you know, like that movie Into the Wild. You ever see that movie? That's what it felt like crazy, wild, scary nature. And I have to admit that I haven't been doing like a lot of extensive hiking, or it's almost like I feel like I can't give over to it completely. I've got too much looming at home, just so much waiting for me. And those of you who've been listening, you know it's all still waiting for me. When I get back, the move and the emotional reality that is really starting to sink in now that I've had enough time to just think a little bit. So it's almost like I need to keep my defenses up some. Like I can't completely let go and take it in because I know in a couple more days I got to go back home and take care of some business, you know? But it is breathtaking. And today was the solstice, and I did take a little hike, like 30 minutes up to this ridge, watched the sunset, and I don't think I've ever been surrounded by so many trees all at once. And the way the light was, and the way the wind blew and made a sound in my ear, and then it would be left with stillness. It was incredible. It's truly spectacular. The planet that we're on, the nature that we're part of. I mean, crazy, amazing. So glad I'm here and having a really good time with the folks that have come. I already got dates for next year, so I'm coming back. It's going to be an annual thing. Feathered Pipe Ranch in Montana. Whew, but like I said, I got to go home in a couple of days, and I think I'll be entering into the swirl once more, but hopefully a little bit refreshed after my time here. It certainly does feel different. It certainly does feel like a comfort to the system. All right. Today on the podcast, I am talking to Alexandria Crow. But actually, as I learned from her, as you'll hear, she actually prefers Alex Crow, even though sort of like her public name is Alexandria Crow. But we had a really great conversation. I had been in contact with her like a long while back and was planning to bring her on the podcast. But then, it didn't happen for a couple of reasons, which we discuss. And then she posted my podcast with Andrew Tanner from the Yoga Journal Conference about the Yoga Alliance on her Facebook page. And it kind of blew up into this like crazy thread that got pretty heated and snarky and stuff. And so I reached out to her to have her come on because I thought, we could definitely have a conversation about that. And I think there was a little bit of trepidation, maybe. I think both of us were a little bit like wondering how this was going to go, because it was kind of coming out of what felt like a, sort of contentious, not directly between us necessarily, but just in general, a kind of contentious conversation. So I guess I thought maybe she would be wondering how I was going to come at the conversation, and I didn't really know what to expect from her. But as it came down, as you'll hear, it was really quite great, and it went in different directions than I had planned, which is always good. And I thought we came to some really good stuff, and it's, again, always really good for me to remember, that we're like whole people, and you sometimes get these little slivers of who you think somebody is. But if you ever get a chance to sit down and talk to them for a while, you get like a broader spectrum of who they are. And I think that's something we need to do more of in general. So I was really glad to have had this time to do it with Alex, and we're going to listen to it today. Before we do, let me just mention I'm going to be in Helsinki, Finland, October 23rd through 30th. And I have my new live stream subscription coming out. All of my public classes on any device for anyone who's not around to attend in person. And I got a couple emails from you guys. You're like, how do I find out about it? I know we haven't even really posted stuff. It's just podcast listeners are getting a heads up. There is going to be like an introductory rate, if I'm not mistaken. So if you're in the know and you're listening to the podcast, then you're going to get in on that. Trust me, it's all going to come out soon. One good way to make sure that you find out about anything that's going on with my stuff is to sign up for my newsletter if you haven't already. You can do that along with find my blog and listen to the archives of this podcast and just generally find out about all of my stuff at jbrownyoga.com. Maybe you would like to show some support for the podcast. Really appreciate it if you would. You could go to iTunes and write a review and give us some stars. You could go to a blog or podcast page and make a direct donation. Thank you very much for those gestures. Let me mention about next week's podcast with Amy Matthews. I did drop that last week. I couldn't help myself, and I usually wait to the outro, but still, I'm excited about it. I feel like we got into some really interesting content that's pressing for me. I'm going to have a blog post that's coming out alongside the podcast with Amy about some things. I've been in her course all year long. If you've been listening to the podcast, I keep mentioning it, and so it kind of culminated in this conversation with her and this blog post I'm writing some, and I'm excited about. So that's going to be next week. You can listen for that. Otherwise, I think maybe we should just get to this podcast with Alex Crow, and I will hit you up on the other side. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit more about my time here at the Feathered Pipe on the other side. But yeah, let's just get to it. Let's listen to this talk I had with Alex Crow.
Hello.
Well, hello there.
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Forgive me, do you prefer Alex or Alexandria?
Only my mother, in her pretentious ways, calls me Alexandria.
Well, very well. Alex it is.
Yep, makes it easier.
Cool, cool. Is it morning for you? You're on the West Coast?
No, I live in Ohio now. I'm in Columbus,
Oh.
so it's the same time as there.
Oh, okay. So it's afternoon for you too. Did you have a good morning?
I did so far.
Yeah.
Just computer work right now. I'm in town for a couple of weeks, so I'm just sitting there catching up online stuff. You?
Same deal. Trying to take it easy in the midst of a swirl and just having a moment, you know?
Yeah, I can understand that.
I think you can. Well, first thing, I feel like I want to tell you why it's taken me so long to bring you on the podcast.
Oh, yeah, go ahead,
Because,
but I don't care one way or the other.
I know, but it's totally me. I don't think it's coming from you. It's like, because we have a mutual friend, Christina Kuhn. She's been on the podcast. And she said to me after I talked to her, she's like, you have to talk to Alexandria. She's like, great, whatever. And Sam. And so I had Sam on. And then, I didn't know much about you. And so it kind of got pushed away. And then I heard you on some other podcasts. Like, I like to listen to Andrea Ferretti's podcast. And you've done like 2 great podcasts with her. And I thought, well, what am I going to talk to her about? They covered it. They did a great job, So I kind of like that was sort of part of it. But then just recently, I dropped that podcast with Andrew Tanner from the Yoga Alliance, and it kind of blew up on your Facebook timeline.
Yeah, it did.
And so I was like, okay, I think we can have a conversation now for sure.
Oh my God, it was so funny. I was like, I didn't even think too much, but I mean, I did. I always contemplate what I'm doing before I post things, but it was more like that's my personal page, and I forget how many people are on it all the time now. And I was like, oh, wait, people are going to lose their mind about this as soon as I put it up. And
they kind of did. But I want to talk about that some today, but I don't want to start there. And the reason I don't want to start there is because I think one of the things that happens on Facebook is you don't get context for people's viewpoints at all,
Exactly.
And so things get twisted all around sometimes, I think.
Yeah, that was why I actually didn't participate much further in that thread, mostly because I was like, I have a very difficult time on social media with like going back and forth and bantering with people because there is no context, there's no tone, there's no ability to say, yeah, but what about, unless you have hours and hours and hours and hours and hours to sit there, which I don't. So,
I'm like a veteran of like common threads, and I have spent time in them over the years. Yeah. But I've also realized that like it's kind of a little bit to me, kind of like when people drive, and they're like by themselves driving, and like Louis C.K.'s got that like bit about that, like when he's in his car,
where you're a total
and he's
asshole
like
in your
you're
car.
like an asshole, like you like say things that you would never say to someone's face.
Oh, exactly.
I think it's kind of like that on Facebook sometimes. Like people are just like by themselves, and they'll like kind of go off in ways that they probably wouldn't have if we were like sitting together,
Oh yeah, I mean, I have experience with that. Like that's actually one of the reasons I don't do that is that when you take the humanity out of the equation, when there's no voice, no face, no anything, people are so much more apt to be like kind of vicious, and it's kind of shocking at times. I've seen some pretty nasty things, and I'm like, wow, that's not. You wouldn't do that in person, would you? Because you wouldn't have any people around you ever.
Exactly. Well, the thing that stood out to me just from like you posting it in the thread was that like I knew that you were like someone who's been very vocal about like injuries in practice and like the power dynamics between teachers and students. Like I heard some of the things that you said, and you're very vocal in those, but I hadn't heard you be so specific about Yoga Alliance.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, okay. Because I'm always interested, like, because, like people don't like to talk about the Yoga Alliance.
Oh, I don't mind.
Like,
I don't mind at all.
Every time I bring it up, like in a blog or like a whatever, it like people just don't engage. Like, I think people have such weird feelings about it. So
I also think they're not terribly educated about it. I mean, at large, I feel like that's a huge issue. I just had one of my mentor students on the phone yesterday, and I was telling her she asked about Yoga Alliance, and because of that thread, and I was telling her kind of how it functions and what their gig is, and how they're just a registry and like they can't actually enforce anything. And she was like, get out. And I said, no. And, when you send in your diploma to them, they contact, and she was a YogaWorks person. And I said, they contact YogaWorks to make sure that it's okay to approve your certificate. It's not even them that are approving it. And she was like, what?
I know, but that is new. Like, I remember a time, like when I first started doing teacher training, I was not registered. Because I was like just fundamentally opposed to the organization. And at that time, you could register. They had register through a non-registered school. You could register and from any training, and it was just like $75 more, and like some more paperwork. But it was truly just a rubber stamp. But I would have to explain to everybody, like you did. Like there always would have to be a conversation about it.
Yeah. And that's the hard part, is that, out there, people really, like, I travel so much and I ask a lot of questions. I'll probably end up like mentioning this. I ask the people I'm working with tons and tons and tons of questions, because I don't have any idea where they're at when I'm walking into a room of, when it's multiple times that I've gone a place, it's a little bit different, but I still inquire. But when they're new, I need to know what they know and what they understand and where they are at. Just in terms of the lay of the land and intellectually with the material. And when I'm asking all of these populations out there about certain things, like they have no idea that Yoga Alliance is what it is. They have a very incorrect understanding that they think it's a legitimizing body. And I'm like, it's actually not. That's what they've turned into.
Well, in quasi way, but I know that, I talked about this with Richard Carpel, one of the first episodes of this podcast ever, because he was the reason why I registered, and they did make that change. At least now the training has to approve it. At least that exists. There was like one layer. There was no layers before. But, the issue is still the same, that like the standards can't really be enforced by them. And there is, I think you're right. Like I always pushed them to stop calling them standards and start calling them curriculum guidelines.
Yeah.
Or something, like language it different. And
exactly. It's so important. Like languaging is so important like that.
And so, I think that, but I also know that when Richard Carpel was doing his thing, like I watched him very transparently explain what you explain to people, to crowds of teachers. And it seemed like people, they wanted the Yoga Alliance to be more than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that they do on one hand, and then I think it's just a lack of understanding the landscape broadly. I think you can have somebody from Yoga Alliance explain that, but if they don't explain it within the context of the entire landscape and the outcomes that are happening for students out there that are signing up for trainings that are registered with Yoga Alliance, but that are just absolutely garbage, and they're, getting hurt and thinking their teacher is this legitimate teacher because they hold this sticker, this logo on their website. I think if you don't tell them, like, this is how this is unfolding broadly, that people are losing money, they're getting injured, they're spending tons and tons of time on things that don't make any sense. They're lacking depth of knowledge. They just so many issues with it. I think that, and they're being, frankly, a lot of places are being undercut because of that, like, logo, and then they sell trainings for super, super cheap, which is, we can talk about like whether that's fine or not, but I don't think, if you can't see the lay of the land broadly, I don't think that you would take it seriously. It's like, oh yeah, whatever. They're like a legitimizing body or not. It doesn't matter. They're the organization. We might as well go with them.
Yeah, trade organization. That's what I try to think of them as. And I don't know. I would say I didn't even want to get this much into it right off the bat, but we're already here. But I was just going to say that, when it comes to people getting hurt, I don't know. I mean, I agree on some level, but I also know that before there was teacher trainings, people were getting hurt too.
Oh, totally. Totally. I mean, that's not surprising.
And I do think that there's, the issue of like there not being quality trainings is partly due to the fact that they have like a Yoga Alliance registry, but not just because of that, you know.
No. It's not, I don't think they're the boogeyman in the
Yeah.
sense that they're the only issue. That would be to be so myopic in
Right.
terms of understanding. There's many, many facets that are coming into why that is a problem. And yeah, it was happening before. I mean, I have a traditional background and that was where I got hurt, but I travel around and like, it's happening everywhere.
That's kind of a good segue. Well, we're going to come back to this and flesh it out more. But before we do, you know, I was trying to do like a little searching around online about you. And I did come across like your Yoga Works teacher bio video from 4 years ago.
Oh my God, yeah.
I'm sorry to like pull that out. I know that's terrible. It's like out of the closet
No,
or whatever.
it's okay.
It's not bad. It's a great video. But like what I thought about when I saw it was like, oh, like it did seem like in the last 4 years you may have evolved quite a bit.
Oh yeah,
that was my sense.
Huge.
Like the voice in the video, and then the voice on your Facebook timeline about Yoga Lines. I was like, wow, that's like a lot in 4 years.
It is, and like that's a really funny thing because I was thinking about it earlier. I was like, I wonder what it, because Andrea, when I do things with her, she's known me through the entire evolution. Like I've known her forever, and so she knows kind of where I stand on things over time. But when it's online that you kind of have to rely on and Google searching and stuff, it can come off a little like incongruent. And I spend a lot of time talking about that because a lot of what I would have said in person is different than what I would have said on a video, so to speak, and not like in a way where I'm hiding anything, but just those videos are made for production and they've got a list of questions for you to answer and things they want you to say. And, you know, it's a promotional video in a lot of ways. And also I spend so much time saying to people, like, I've done all of these things that I'm going to point out. I've been the person who's posted the fancy picture. I've been the person doing conferences. I've been the person writing things that, like, you know, I would love to be able to go back and correct at this point. I've been the teacher that's taught things that's far too fancy. I've injured myself. I've been the person who's done literally almost all of it, except pull your shoulders away from your ears. That's usually the one I can get away with.
You were spared that one, huh? I wasn't. I had to retrain myself out of that one. You were spared that one, huh?
I was spared that one. That's the only one I was spared, but I've done all the other stuff. And so I always say, like, listen, at the beginning, I start every workshop series the same with like a bunch of kind of introductory points and like asterisks about like this. These are the things that are going to come up. And I say, I'm going to be pretty blunt about a bunch of things that I know you may be doing, your teachers may be doing. But when I'm talking, just understand I'm talking about a former version of myself or the yoga industry at large. That's the shoulders away from the ear one. And I point that out because it's very easy to personalize it. And I always say, I don't know you. I don't know your teacher. They're not here. You're here, but you'd have many reasons to be doing what you're doing. So just know I've done all of this. And if you want to see how much of it I've done, just Google and watch videos of me doing crazy stuff and saying everything I'd never say at this point. So yeah, it's pretty funny to look back.
Understand. I mean, whenever you like kind of document yourself,
yes,
it's like stamped in time. So like, you know, even back when, you know, Christina first gave me your number, like it was earlier on in the podcast, like a year and a half ago or something.
Yeah.
I was like much less confident. Anybody can go back and listen to the early episodes and hear for themselves, you know, or go back and read some of the early things I wrote. You know, I was like, oh, I cringe too. So and especially when it comes to teaching, I think that's a really big thing these days. Like I know that there are things that I used to teach and say that I would never teach and say now.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's one thing that I've been talking about it a lot lately is I was fortunate. I'm thankful for everything that's kind of come my way, but I was on video, you know, when that was just starting to get ramped up. That was there's videos of me that are quite old, and it's really difficult because what I see is the ripple effect out there into the landscape of what I've done, and there's a timelessness to all of it where unless you're really keyed into what haircut I currently have, you'll have no idea what timeline that's on.
If you don't check the date of the post, I totally understand because it's asynchronous.
And a lot of them,
it's
they
like
change it nowadays or they delete it, which is really difficult because then it's like, well, when like all the videos I have of classes, they're not dated. So it's hard, and
I've been even planning on like making like a little supplemental thing for like my online course, because there's just like one or two things in there that I've changed that I feel like people should know, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I think that I wish there was the capability to do that. That's why I produce a lot of my own stuff now, why I don't do a lot of online content for other people, because I need it to be dynamic so that I can update it as needed and serve the population a little bit better. But it's not easy. The online thing's not easy out there.
No. I mean, that's very interesting to me, though, that you're doing stuff on your own more. I like do all my own stuff, but that's because you've had some pretty high-profile gigs in the past, you know?
I have, and I'm super grateful for all of that, and it's something that I'm really one of those people that is always inspecting everything that I'm doing, and then how it lands and how it ripples out and what the effect is long term. And just when I think like, okay, this will now work, it doesn't. It ends up being a little confused, or it ends up with an outcome I didn't anticipate, in terms of, you know, somebody hears you say what they think they heard you say, and they go and re-articulate it completely differently. So, all that stuff is something I consider all the time. And so I need to have a little bit more control of where the content goes and what's done with it and how it can be reproduced and repackaged and resold. And I just I'm not in a place where I feel responsible doing stuff that I don't have a grip on anymore.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people learn that same lesson the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, I'll be honest, like a few years back, before I know what I know now, someone had called me up and said, hey, we want you to like be in our magazine ads. I totally would have done it.
Oh, totally. I know. And that's the thing.
And so when you see the hardtail ads now, what do you feel about that? Like,
I feel, first and foremost, like it's really difficult because things are layered, and this is where things get confused online. Yeah. That's a family that I love that owns that company, and they make a great product, and I absolutely support all of that. They actually don't do ads like that, as far as I know, anymore. So, but
I mean, this is a new conversation that people are even having about some of this stuff. Frankly, that's what I'm saying. It's very recent. Like only a few years ago, it was a different story. You know.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, when I chose to do that, like one of my jokes always is like, sorry about that. Sorry about Instagram and all the Instagram stuff, like, because all those ads and everything were pre-Instagram. So, but I look at them now and, well, first I'm like, wow, that'll be really nice to have that stuff when I'm 80.
Well, but it's funny you say that because, you know, when I was at my peak of like asana performance, it was before cell phones.
Oh, yes,
so we didn't just have, I have like some that were taken from like a professional photographer, but you had to like plan it out. You didn't just like have your phone there to snap them off, you know, like.
Oh, no, that was how I was too. There was no, that was like when the first iPhone came out. And so, but they were all professional photos. Like the vast majority of what I have, I think I've taken a couple videos, but I've never taken a selfie.
Is that because you hooked up with Yoga Journal pretty earlier, and they have like a whole big, you know?
Mm-hmm. And then Hardtail.
How did you get the Yoga Journal gig? When did that first happen?
So Catherine Budig and I had a bunch of friends that were all, you know, working with Yoga Journal, and she had an article actually that she had asked me. We were both living in Venice at that time, if I would model for that article that she had written. I believe it was her first article. And so I submitted. You have to like submit a model application or whatever. So I submitted that, and then a number of months later, Andrea called me and said, hey, we want to hire you for this article, which I had known about. It wasn't a lock or anything, but Catherine had already run it by me. And so she said, we want to put you in that article. And then would you do the cover too? And I was like, what?
No.
What do you mean?
Score.
And it was interesting though. Like, it's really funny. Like going back to kind of how things ripple out and like the hardtail ads and the Yoga Journal stuff, is I remember shooting that and having some understanding, subconsciously at least, that it wasn't going to do what people think it does for them, but that my conscious mind was like all excited. I was like, oh my God, this will like helps. And it
Look, I'm
didn't.
not
It was
gonna
like
lie. No, but
crickets.
I would have been psyched if Yoga
I
Journal
was
said, "We
totally
want to put
psyched.
you on the cover of Yoga Journal." I don't
Listen, I've
care,
done it twice.
even though I don't like Yoga Journal magazine so much. Whatever, like, I would still have been psyched. I would have totally
Oh,
done it. Anybody
totally.
would do it. Anybody's
Of
lying if they
course.
say they wouldn't. That's all I'm
Of
saying.
course. And I love the experience, and I'm not like, I have no regrets about doing it. It's what I try not to regret anything, but it's what I did. And it comes with great stuff, and it comes with consequences. And, because of that, I just thought my phone would be like ringing off the hook, and I couldn't have been more wrong about that. And I
You still
actually
had to
had
go
to
out and be a
do,
yoga teacher,
I had
right?
to pay the dues. I had to do like what you had to do, and what is a little different these days, it seems, but what all of us had to do in terms of paying our dues and showing up and doing really hard work and constantly evolving and educating. And like, it takes a long time, but that was how that happened.
Frankly, you had like way more pressure on you because of the profile. Like, that's harder. It's harder to do it. Harder to grind it out and learn how to do your job, which is how you learn how to be a yoga teacher, like by doing it.
Yep, over and over and over again with somebody watching over your shoulder like I had. So it was...
yeah, that's right. You did have like a one-to-one kind of mentorship with that guy, James Brown. Is that his name, right?
That is his name.
I know. And honestly, I know a little bit about him just from like reading stuff, and we've had some exchanges because he's very vocal about like anti-yoga lines, and like one of the more vocal guys out there. And so, okay, that makes sense. So he's like a Yoga Works teacher trainer, right?
He was. Yeah, that was where I did my initial 200-hour with him. And then he left and started his own company, which was called Yoga Poser back in the day. And I went with him, and I actually just was his assistant. He was my mentor. I just apprenticed him, and I sat in on everything that I could, like teacher training after teacher training. I sat through workshops, and I taught. He had a foundational class as part of that teacher training that was actually on a schedule. And so I, for the first 3 weeks, would teach this foundational sequence, and he would sit there with his laptop and write feedback for me. And so I had this very old school way. And then he was developing materials for this teacher training company. So I wrote all the rough drafts of like the asana manual, and then he would correct it, and I'd go back in, and we wrote it all in anatomical terms. And
so you got education. You got education.
I got the real deal, and I'm so grateful for it because it's very rare out there. But I had to hack it out like the old way, the hard way, and I wasn't actually upset about it. I'm 18 years as a gymnast, and my father instilled such good work ethic in me, and I don't mind grinding it out. Like everybody always says, "Oh my God, Alex, how do you do so much?" And like you're a workhorse, and that's true. That's just my nature. My sister and I are the same.
You got trained early on. So how I don't know a lot about like competitive gymnastics. I'm sure there's like a circuit where you like trying to get into the Olympics or something.
I wanted to be in the Olympics really bad. I was a little too tall and a little too fearful. But I competed, and I walked onto the team in Arizona and spent 3 years on the U of A gymnastics team. I never competed for them. I got hurt every year in like minor ways, like shin splints that meant I couldn't run, and minor things to my wrists. And so I never competed, but I was on the team. And that, that informed a lot of what I did as a yogi and why I was in this like traditional, why I was drawn to Ashtanga, to be honest. I was very familiar. I don't like being told what to do. I like figuring it out.
Teach me the sequence and I'll nail it.
Yep. And so it was very much that. And then to find out, when I'm talking about injury out there and everything, it's not just the injury. It's a broader topic for me that I'm interested in the sense that I really bought into this concept of yoga. Like I'd been raised in a faith system that I wasn't into, that I didn't understand, that I didn't fit into. I was looking for something.
To interrupt you. Your family was evangelical Christians, I read. Is that right?
Yeah, they were. And it was funny. Like my grandfather's a traveling minister, which is pretty funny.
Oh, what a weird. Yes, I heard you talk about the parallels between that and the yoga teacher profession.
Yeah. And also just to realize like I ended up doing exactly what my grandfather did in the sense of like traveling around and speaking about a topic that has, a sort of spirituality associated with it.
Well, how early on did you start to feel like, oh, I don't, because I know I broke from my family's religion probably around age 16. How old were you?
I was like birth.
You never were comfortable with it from an early age?
I wasn't comfortable with it. It was an interesting thing because my grandfather was part of this. It was the Pentecostal church in Canada, which would be like the evangelical church down here. And I went to the mega church, and it was speaking in tongues and the altar calls and, all of that stuff, the laying of hands. And I was very uncomfortable with that, but there was something inside of me that was just like, I don't get this. I don't feel what those people feel. They've got their hands up. I don't want to do it. I didn't understand it. And I think some of it had to do with the incongruency of like what happens on those stages, what happens out in front of people, and then what's behind the scenes and how people live their lives behind the scenes. And because my grandfather was involved in that, I was privy to some of that information, which was quite confusing as a kid to be told like, this is what we're going to do, but then we buy into this and this is the faith system that we're going with, but to also know on the other side that people were miserable and not particularly kind to one another, and that there was all sorts of things that they would never want to expose out there, which I get now, like long term, I understand it from an adult's perspective, but I did not buy in for a long, long time in my family. So just because I would say over and over, like, I don't get this. It doesn't make sense to me. Yeah.
Wow.
But
that's
pretty funny in retrospect.
Well, not so funny, but it's interesting to me that you so early on could tell. I mean, it makes sense. Like small children are like sometimes before you get to a place where you can understand the complexities of hypocrisy. Like it's just hard to process that, I imagine,
Oh yeah. And I think that's a major informing tool for who I am, or like something that shaped me very, very, very strongly. This idea of hypocrisy, I was just griping about it the other night. I have a really, really hard time with it in the sense that I make space for people to be human and for them to make mistakes. And I do it all the time. I am by no means perfect or resolved in every single way that I could be. But hypocrisy is one that I get really hung up on sometimes and struggle with, because I just see the damage it does. And so that's like one of the reasons, you bring up hardtail or videos or any of that. And I'm very, very quick to say, like, I understand how that appears now. I know where it came from. I know why I was doing it then. I'm not going to justify it in my current state. I was making those choices fully informed in that moment, but I didn't know what I know now. And so at this stage in the game, or where we are as a community at large, I choose not to participate in that stuff. I totally get if people want to and why they do it, but I'm not going to say the things I say and continue to do things that would be completely hypocritical from my standpoint. So but it did make me very, very, very sensitive to that behind the scenes thing.
But that's interesting. But I would say that, making like growing and evolving as a person so that things that you said in the past are not things that you stand by now isn't the same as hypocrisy. You know what I mean?
Well, I think I'm framing it up in this way, that I see how it could turn hypocritical very quickly, where you can justify just about anything you want and still continue to.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.